The Democrats support coups, imperialism, and the oil industry as much as any Republican. I think it's so interesting. It's actually quite infuriating when Obama tries to preach to people about the importance of, addressing climate action.
It takes a walk with my daughters, and I want to be able them to see, or my grandkids, I want them to see the same things I saw as I was growing up.
Suddenly, America's like the biggest oil producer and the biggest that was me, people. I just want you to...
To just the sadness that I would feel if my kids can never see a glacier the way I saw when I went up to Alaska.
I wake up on a daily basis and count this money up, I'm already rich. I go so already rich. I fell in love with this dolly. I fell in love with the rolling. I wake up, pray every morning. These demons, they calling my son. I said, fuck all of you hoes. I'm balling out of control. I'm balling out of control. If I can give everything back to you, all this passion.
One of my favorite moments at COP26 was when a reporter asked how Democrats can claim to support addressing climate change while also voting to increase the budget for the Defense Department, an entity that has created more pollution than 140 countries combined. Let's look at Nancy's response.
The Pentagon is a larger polluter than 140 countries combined. How can we seriously talk about net zero if there is this bipartisan consensus to constantly expand this large contributor to climate change, which is exempt from these conferences?
National security advisors all tell us that the climate crisis is a national security matter.
So first, she frames the climate crisis as a national security matter. What she's trying to do by framing the climate crisis as a national security matter is to justify giving more money to Border Control, Homeland Security, and ICE. So all of the refugees who are created from the tsunamis, hurricanes, flash floods, forest fires, tornadoes, when they try to find a new home, if that home is in a different country, they will be met by officers at the border who shoot tear gas and bullets at them if they try to cross.
It is a national security issue because of the all of the conditions that climate crisis produces. I won't go into all of them, but they are cause for migration, conflict over habitat and resources, and again, a security challenge.
Also very funny, she says it is a national security issue because of all of the conditions that the climate crisis produces: migration and conflict over habitat and resources. That is so funny coming from an American saying climate crisis will lead to conflict over resources when we just got out of Iraq and Afghanistan. So, Bolivia having lithium and also being led by a dictator and having human rights violations, that's just a coincidence. Elon Musk flat out saying that he supports a coup in Bolivia so he can get lithium for Tesla's batteries. That is not what imperialism is. That's not what America stands for. That conflict over habitat and resources, yeah, America wrote the blueprint on that.
A huge portion of the world's population lives near oceans. Mm-hmm. If they start moving, then you start seeing scarce resources the subject to competition between populations. Mm-hmm. This is the reason why the Pentagon has said this is a national security issue. This isn't just an environmental issue. Mm-hmm. This is a national security issue.
As I say, the Defense Department sees this systemically, that we have to stop it as a national security issue, and one way to do that is to stop our dependence on fossil fuels, which exacerbate the climate crisis.
Even if you were unsentimental about that, in very hard-headed terms, you've got to worry about the national security implications of this and the capacity for the existing world order as we understand it to survive the kinds of strains that the scientists are predicting without action.
So Nancy's basically saying militarizing the borders to prevent climate refugees from coming in. Yeah, that's the role that the Defense Department plays. So if they create more CO2 emissions than 140 countries combined, who gives a fuck? We need them to put kids in cages at the border and make sure none of those refugees from the climate crisis make it into the US. Because, give us you're tired, you're poor, you're weary does not apply if you lost your home to a forest fire. And it certainly doesn't apply if you lost it to a hurricane or tsunami. That was in part created by the CO2 emissions that the United States and the Defense Department produces. So Democrats take no accountability for the Defense Department's actions. They basically divert the question. But, maybe I'm being a little bit too hard on Nancy because she says that she believes in climate change. And even though in November she officiated the wedding of Ivy Getty, the great-granddaughter of J. Paul Getty, the oil baron and richest man of the 20th century, she absolutely will hold oil companies accountable for their long-lasting effects on the environment. The fracking, the drilling permits, all of that. The thing that Biden said he was going to reduce. The representative from New Jersey said this: I've had talks with the Defense Department, with the Navy in particular, about how they have to respond to what's going on. So I really do think that there is no reason why what we're putting together with Build Back Better and other things can't respond to the Defense Department and have the same impact in terms of reducing emissions. And I do think the Defense Department is very much aware of the fact they have to play a major role, both from a strategic as well as for the good of the world. So I don't see what we're doing as something being inconsistent with climate action. I really don't. So to break down his response, first he says that the Defense Department responds to what's going on. Yeah, they react to the climate crisis. That doesn't absolve them of creating an egregious amount of CO2 emissions. The ends don't justify the means. You can say they hand out water bottles after a hurricane flattens a town. That doesn't mean that they have to have the largest military in the world. You can say that, they may provide food and cots for people in California to sleep on after they lose their home to a forest fire. That does not absolve them of having the largest emissions of any military on the earth, yet alone 140 countries combined. The second point he says is that he also mentions that the Defense Department plays a major strategic role. An airstrike in Syria killed 70 civilians in 2019, and officers tried to hide the casualties. The response of General Kenneth McKenzie to the investigation was, he was, quote, looking forward to benefiting from them as we conduct operations going forward. August 29th of this year, a drone strike killed 10 civilians, 7 of which were children, in Kabul. Despite an internal investigation by the Air Force finding multiple errors in how targets were identified, there was no recommendation made for disciplinary action. Those are a few examples of the strategic role that the Defense Department plays. And it's so important that we support that strategic role so they can pollute the environment even more. And third, he doubles down on his stance. He doesn't take accountability for the fact that the Defense Department will continue to pollute the world. And he rationalizes it by saying they need that oil and gas to drone strike civilians. Remember on the campaign trail when we got all those nice promises about stopping drilling permits and addressing climate change, reducing CO2 emissions.
In my view, we've already waited too long to deal with this climate crisis. We can't wait any longer. We see it with our own eyes, we feel it, we know it in our bones, and it's time to act. That's why I'm signing today an executive order to supercharge our administration's ambitious plan to confront the existential threat of climate change. It is an existential threat.
Stopping oil companies from polluting land and things like that. The first time Biden was in office, when he was a vice president, he got to watch Obama have the National Guard beat and arrest protesters at the Dakota Access Pipeline. And I think that, really set the tone for his presidency.
We're not going to completely reverse the warming that now is inevitable, but we can stop it before it becomes catastrophic.
I think it's so interesting. It's actually quite infuriating when Obama tries to preach to people about the importance of, addressing climate action.
It takes a walk with my daughters, and I want to be able them to see, or my grandkids, I want them to see the same things I saw as I was growing up.
Suddenly, America's like the biggest oil producer and the biggest that was me, people. I just want you to...
To just the sadness that I would feel if my kids can never see a glacier the way I saw when I went up to Alaska.
And it's so funny that Obama shamelessly bragged, after he left office, of course, about how he made the U.S. the largest producer of oil. People still really think that Democrats are going to hold oil executives in the oil industry accountable. And I would love to hear Obama's rationalization of how arresting and shooting water cannons at people trying to stop a pipeline being constructed that will eventually leak into the land and water, how that is in line with him addressing climate change.
The camps block construction of a nearly 1,200-mile pipeline that would carry crude oil from the Bakken oil fields to Illinois. Builders want to tunnel under the Missouri River. The Native Americans say if there was ever a leak, it would pollute a tribal lifeline that also provides drinking water to millions of Americans downstream.
My question is in solidarity with the indigenous people in not my country, but in America itself. I just heard recently that this group of people is fighting to protect their ancestral land against the Dakota Access Pipeline. Yeah, so my question is, in your capacity, what can you do to ensure the protection of the ancestral land, the supply of clean water, and also environmental justice is upheld? Yeah.
Well, it's a great question. As many of you know, the way that Native Americans were treated was tragic. And one of the priorities that I've had as president is restoring an honest and generous and respectful relationship with Native American tribes. And so we have made an unprecedented investment in meeting regularly with the tribes, helping them design ideas and plans for economic development, for education, for health that is culturally appropriate for them. And this issue of ancestral lands and helping them preserve their way of life is something that we have worked very hard on. Now, some of these issues are caught up with laws and treaties, and so I can't give you details on this particular case. I'd have to go back to my staff and find out how are we doing on this one. But what I can tell you is that we have actually restored more rights among Native Americans to their ancestral lands, sacred sites, waters, hunting grounds. We have done a lot more work on that over the last 8 years than we had in the previous 20, 30 years, and this is something that I hope will continue as we go forward. But it was an excellent question.
You know, crazy thought, I know, just out of the blue. I would think if you support addressing the climate crisis, you would now, I don't know, support the people who are trying to stop a pipeline from being built, especially on indigenous land. And it's just really sad to me that people will criticize Nancy Pelosi, of all people, to say that she doesn't care about climate change and, you know, she's out of touch and she's elite. Well, think about how hard it was for her to spend her weekend at the wedding of Ivy Getty, the granddaughter of J. Paul Getty, a oil baron who was worth $1.2 billion. They can't remember how many drilling permits Obama signed, or you know, him taking a picture with Blaise Compaoré, the former leader of Burkina Faso, who was on trial for being a war criminal. Or they don't remember any of that. What they remember is Obama sometimes danced and he had a khaki suit and a Portuguese water dog. People don't realize how unbothered politicians are by their constituents, how little consideration they give for the working class. And like in our faces, they'll do like the sad photo shoots holding the candles, or, you know, they'll take a knee when police departments are being burnt to a Kentucky Fried Crisp